Hello everyone, I'm JP and this is another Playscii dev update. So we've got our scene that we were looking at last time in the last video, as I recall, but I'm going to turn on some debug visualization stuff that shows some of what I've been up to with the program here. So this is collision stuff. Actually, that specifically is collision, and then there's also like render bounds and origin. But yeah, so I have some sort of collision detection and resolution system in here. The problem is, as you can probably clearly see, is that it is terrible. And I'm working to fix this. Yeah, I'm going to touch this object and it's just going to completely freak out. And that is obviously not good. And I got to a certain point with it and decided to set it aside to work on other stuff, which includes... for one, objects sort correctly now, based on, well, you can sort them based on Z depth, which if you're constructing a piece of art that has multiple depth layers, then, you can sort it based on Z, or you can sort objects based on their Y position, so that you can see here, like, if I'm standing behind this railing, then I'm sorting behind it, because you can see my little positional indicator there. It is above in screen space where the railing is, and then if I go in front of it, then I sort in front of it. And the same thing with this bed here. This is an independent tile object, and I can go behind it or in front of it. And then I actually sort in relation to these objects, even though they're completely terrible as far as collision goes. So yeah, like, there's probably, yeah, see, like, there's... The thing that I realized soon after I started adding collision detection is that I needed several things. I needed ways to spawn and manipulate objects from within game mode. And as I started thinking about it, I was like, well, really, this sounds kind of more like an editor. So, like a little level editor. As distinct from... like the tile art editor that we've got here. This is what I've taken to calling this, and there's only like one or two user-facing places where this is where this distinction is referred to. But this is art mode, where I have an ASCII character set and I can paint stuff with it and all that sort of thing. And then back in game mode, I can control a character and stuff, but then I also have like these editing type things that allow me to drag around objects and change their position and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, and when I realized, I was like, okay, cool, this editing functionality is good, that's good to have. I want to be able to like put down objects and play with their placement and things like that. I was like, well, yeah, how do you save the changes for this? Because previously I was using, actually I've kind of eradicated the old way of doing that, but basically there was a Python script for each game that controlled its initialization, basically. Actually, I've probably still got it here. Yeah. So yeah, this was like just a Python script that was like defining some like importing the base classes from the actual Playscii code base, and then like defining some subclasses that just have a few properties tweaked, and then actually just running some Python. And this was executed from within the game world. Hey, let's load up a game state. And I realized like there were several things that were suboptimal about that. Like it was like, okay, yeah, you're kind of running code that doesn't know anything about the larger thing that it's running in, and there's like Python like namespace and scope weirdness and all that kind of stuff. So what I moved to is doing away with that and replacing it with just data, which is honestly like, I don't know whether it's more appropriate to call this to call it save like emulator to make the analogy to emulator save states, or to just call it like a save game. I mean, to an extent they're the same thing in a lot of games. Like a save anywhere game, you are kind of saving out the state, albeit a limited subset of the state. And that's exactly what's going on here. This is a state file. This is JSON, and it saves out a few things about the world, like where the camera is, and then the rest of it is just object definitions. And this is a distinct subset. Like in game object, there's all kinds of goo here that just define, you know, the transient state and have that object doing all of the things that it needs to do. Whereas this is really just like, okay, what do I need to be able to recreate this object's state as far as we care about it? And so, yeah, so that's what I've got here. Every game can have a starting state defined here that's just called start.gs game state. That's the file format. And so when I hit F2 to reset the game state, it goes back to that, but I can also, like, you know, I can just run around and just kind of like mutate the game state here, drag some stuff around, whatever. And then I can say, save this to a new game state. And then I can run around some more and do whatever. And then I can reset and be like, okay, we're back to where we were. And then I can load that game state back, and all of the changes that I had made are still are preserved. And this object is still freaking out because the collision is terrible. So yeah, this object collision, you know, there's a few different kinds of collision going on here. This is just a circle. I mean, they all produce an, as you can see, suboptimal result currently, but that is its own, as I've said, that is its own problem to fix. But yeah, the player, I kind of recognized that the player wants to have one type of collision, like a circle, so that you slide along walls and slide off of corners and stuff like that, and then like some objects can have just like a bounding box basically, and then other things want to have their collision defined like the background here. Basically this is all just one big object. Well, that's a separate object that I created just to create the parallax illusion. Yeah, so like, you know, this is all just one piece. You can see like the actual visible art as well as the thing. And when we go back in here, so this is on a separate layer. Like I can change the layer visibility here. So this is the collision layer for this, and we can see in our little layer list here, this thing is just called collision, and then layer 1 is where we have the actual visible artwork and stuff. And basically any non-blank tile, like I can create some new collision here and then jump back into the game, and it shows it's visible immediately, and then I jump back in here and maybe I didn't save it. Yeah, maybe I've got to save it. Well, actually, I'm not really sure why that's not generating collision fresh, because it does basically do that. That is essentially what it does. Okay, well, but yeah, and so then like these blue lines that you're seeing around the tile collision here is those are the actual collision shapes that it's generating that the physics system is talking to. And yeah, I'm gonna go over like the collision and physics situation in a little more detail. I didn't want to like front load that just because it does get into some nitty gritty. The last thing that I've got here that's cool. Hold on, let me restore this to its previous state. The last thing that I've got here that's kind of cool is that these class definitions still do exist. So when we look at the start data here, you know, we see like, okay, where's the player? Okay, the player, what's getting actually saved to the state file about the player here? They've got their position, they've got their art's offset, like, you know, the fact that the art draws from the actual object's location is down by the base of Chrono here, whereas the actual art has its own pivot and all that kind of stuff. That's fairly standard, you know, like a sprite or a mesh in a 2D or 3D engine, respectively, will have its own pivot. And then, yeah, there's like the actual piece of Playscii art that this thing is using. The player specifically is a special case because, you know, it uses multiple pieces of animated art to play its run animations and stuff. And then there's the actual class name. And so like, okay, well, there's this class name here. Where is that getting defined? That is getting defined in the scripts file for this game. And one of these scripts files, you can have multiple ones, whatever. And so you can import classes. You can import the base Playscii classes like game object here. And I created a few convenience ones like pickup and dynamic object, dynamic box object, and whatever. Um, and their actual behavior is getting defined from this thing, and that behavior is reloaded not when Playscii launches, but every time you load a state file. So to give you an example of what you can do with that is I'm going to go in and change the collision radius on this little I don't know, I called it an urn, but it's just kind of like a little bin type thing. And then when I reload that, the collision is larger. It still freaks out because it's terrible, but you know, my changes took effect here, you know, without having to relaunch the editor. So if I was like, you know, in the middle of editing some other stuff, you know, like some art changes or whatever, then you know, that would all be reflected. And this doesn't just extend to data. I can actually like define new behavior here. So I can do, for instance, like I can just add a new wrinkle, like I can extend the base, my parent classes here, like update function, and be like, okay, well, let's just write some totally new code here. Let's say that, sure, like, yeah, so let's make this thing just weirdly oscillate, you know. And we reload that, and it is sure enough doing a goofy, weird thing. So this is kind of like what I had been aiming at with game mode from the very start, you know, where I have this thing that's basically a live editing environment, where I can kind of be continually playing and messing with a game state. I can be doing kind of level designy things, you know, if I've got like a tile set that I'm like building, you know, I can be editing, you know, base environment geo. I can be, you know, moving, you know, dynamic and static object positions, you know, around. And I can do all of that without having to like quit out of the game and make a code change and then launch it back and like recreate the state that I was messing with and all that. So this is all kind of, you know, aside from the collision being horribly busted still, this is the culmination of a lot of the things that I've been working on for the past, you know, couple of weeks. And that's super exciting because it means that I will soon be able to leave behind our old friend Chrono Test here and start working on my own game prototype and building art for it and kind of figuring out what the world scale is and kind of starting to do level design and game design stuff. Like, I'm really unblocked on almost all of that stuff. The one thing that is still blocking me is this collision stuff. And I think I've covered just about everything else now. So I'll probably launch into that. One other note here, there's like a little bit of, you know, when I click on different objects here, it's showing, there's this little panel that's stuck to the right edge of the screen that's showing, you know, that's showing just object name and properties. I think this is honestly a stub for something that's going to be a lot more involved in the future. Like, I think this thing on the right here will probably just turn into a properties sheet and editor, where you can go in and be like, okay, this is this thing's position, and these are other properties that are like exposed for editing, and I can edit those in real time. Because right now, like I can use our old friend, the real-time console here, and I can get the player, I can get the selected object, you know, and then I can be like, okay, well, what's your X position? What if that was, I don't know, yeah, what if that was -15, and then boom, the camera pans over. So I can just mutate these things from the console. I can also say, yeah, what if I want to spawn another one of these urns? And then boom, I've got that. And so, and then on the left here, I think what I'm going to have on the left side of the screen, I'm going to have like a button panel that is basically like the level editor kind of controls, where I can like save and load a state, because you know there's no UI here the way that there is in art mode. Like, I've got a few things here that let you just kind of like enter into game mode, but I quickly realized, like, yeah, the fact that there's not a menu bar, and kind of for good reason, in game mode compared to art mode, you know, I should probably just build like this simple, very simple little like editor button UI sort of thing that lets me do the game mode specific stuff. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do there. And yeah, and then I will have like kind of all of the tools that I need to like make levels and make gameplay happen and kind of continuously tune it and add functionality. And I'm really excited about that. It's super cool. There's just one thing that I have to do before I can really get into that, which is kind of fix this terrible collision. Now I'm going to explain, like, yeah, what am I, like, how did I make such a mess of this? Well, I looked around. I considered, I weighed my options carefully because I had never really written any kind of robust collision code before or anything like that. I read some of the great tutorials and stuff. Like, yeah, let me open up these. Yeah, like MetaNet did these like cool 2D collision tutorials back in the day, like for basically describing the approach that they used for N. And some of these things are like interactive, I guess. Like you can, yeah, you can like they're made in Flash. So you can like kind of drag them around and see these principles illustrated. This is a fantastic, this is still, it's like 10 years old now, but it's still a fantastic resource for understanding the principles behind collision detection and resolution. It's super good. It doesn't get bogged down in like silly and like weird math stuff. Like, you know, sometimes you look at a Wikipedia article for a math topic and it's terrible because it's throwing all this jargon at you and it makes you feel really, you know, ignorant. Anyway, so I looked at that and I was like, okay, yeah, cool, I get this, you know, and like I kind of have a handle on some of the simplifying assumptions that are specific to my engine. Like objects can be variable sizes in this engine, obviously, in Playscii here, which is not the case in N plus or N plus or whatever. You know, so the thing that I think an assumption that they were making that simplified a lot of what they were doing, you know, I wasn't able to make use of that assumption. And so I was like, okay, well, let me just try to like write my own and just assume that like everything's a bounding box because that's a relatively safe assumption. Where I ran into real trouble there, though, is that, you know, at the end of the day, this is not a bounding box. Like this is a tile-based thing, and I can turn these into lots of little boxes, but that's kind of inefficient, and it doesn't actually solve a lot of my problems as far as like it doesn't help me easily answer, hey, have these two shapes penetrated, and what's the resolution, you know, vector, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I like tried to write my own version of it, and it was like unspeakably crappy. Like this is not that approach. This is my second draft. But what I started looking at was people recommended to me, like, hey, why don't you just use Box2D and use their collision system. Box2D is, well, I was going to bring up the website here, but I don't know. It has a website. And it's Box2D is like this, you know, very well-established 2D physics library where you can have like rigid bodies and stuff. And I was like, oh, is that overkill? Like that seems like it's, you know, a bunch of and Chipmunk is another physics library that is similar to Box2D and does a few things differently and whatever. That is actually what I ended up going with, but they're similar in purpose, if not in execution. You know, and I was like, but I don't need, you know, this is the kind of thing like Box2D, I think Angry Birds, or at least the original version of Angry Birds, yeah, used Box2D, and it's like, you use that kind of 2D rigid body physics stuff when you want to have stuff tumbling around, when you want to do stuff like boxes falling over and objects splitting apart and falling into pieces and all this complex stuff. And I was like, that seems like overkill, but, you know, a few people told me like, hey, what you can just tell one of your, you know, your shapes and your bodies in Box2D or Chipmunk to just be you can just use them for collision detection, basically. So you have these shapes that are attached to this, and that's what I ended up doing. So this thing, the player here, is a circle, and the sim is running. The physics sim is running only to the extent that it's I'm setting up these collision handlers. And I'll show you the terrible. This, I think, is where the horribleness of this code lives. In game world, we like establish these kind of global collision resolver things, and then we say, okay, use this function when a contact begins and continues and ends, and whatever. And then, you know, so I'm basically doing manual collision. Like I'm using the physics library for collision detection, and then I'm doing my own stuff for collision resolution. Thus far, as you can see, this is really not a good result. And I think a lot of this is just kind of down to my ignorance of it. So I really just kind of need to like just launch this code into the sun and figure out a better way. But I'm kind of at a loss as to how to do that. Because because I can read a lot of, you know, existing collision detection articles and even look at some code, but none of them are quite doing things exactly the way that I am trying to do them here, where I have this, you know, tile-based world, but also just, you know, primitive objects sliding around. I think all of those things are important. Like I would jettison some of those things if I felt like it would simplify everything, but like this is about as simple, and like this is what my needs are. So I've kind of resolved to figure out how to make that work. So I went with Chipmunk over Box2D just because, well, for a few reasons. I liked the API, like just the actual usage of the API better. It's written in a way that makes it easier for me to use it with the version of Python that I'm using, and it's also like it works with Python 3, and it's potentially compatible with the PyPy interpreter, which I would like to switch to someday for because it has much better performance. Whereas Box2D seemed like it was like, oh yeah, there's a pure Python implementation of Box2D, but it's not really going anywhere. And I looked at both of these, and both of them are kind of not under active development much these days, which was a little weird. Box2D does have a bigger community, and so, you know, I kind of like wrote down a lot of my questions about collision detection, like, hey, I don't know if I'm on the right track here, you know, and I still have not, like, that was like a week or two ago, and I still have not gotten a response on the Chipmunk forums, which is a shame. I mean, I guess there is activity, and people just looked at my question and didn't really know how to answer it or anything. So yeah, like, I have the feeling that what I want to accomplish is very doable. I just kind of need to like bang my head against it some more and hopefully like get some expert advice. So if you know about this kind of stuff, then let me know, you know, reach out to me in the comments for this video or on Twitter or whatever. 'Cause yeah, like I've got something that kind of works. Like I get how the API works and all that, but I still am not sure if I'm like, you know, going against the grain of how this library wants to be used. I don't know if I'm doing something that it is just like by design incapable of. But yeah, like I really don't want to roll my own collision stuff from the ground up, like, because, you know, then I would be like responsible for that implementation of it, and I would like, you know, like looking at these proven libraries, they had like years of development each. And it's like, okay, you know, and they've got like documentation, and, you know, even though I'm not getting great support for them, like they do have support, you know, and like people have used them to do stuff. And, you know, doing all of this, you know, like I feel like anything that I would write myself is just not going to be as robust as this, as these two off-the-shelf solutions. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I want to get this collision stuff taken care of, because all the gameplay stuff that I'm going to be doing is going to be like, okay, cool, I'm colliding with this object. I want to be able to pick up this object here and then throw it across the room and have it bounce off of a wall. And not in like the rigid body physics sense, but really just like in the Mario physics sense, where it's like, okay, this thing is collided. I want to like reverse its momentum. But when the player does like rub their face up against a wall here, I don't want this terrible jittering, you know? This is just unacceptably terrible. You know, I want them to like collide smoothly and slide along the wall, and as soon as they hit an open edge, you know, or they go into a corner, I want that all to just kind of work. So yeah, I need that stuff to work before I can really do real gameplay work. And then once I do, like, man, I'll be sitting pretty. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. So a lot of cool stuff on like the object system and editing front, and, you know, I'm gonna like build a little bit more UI to make that stuff as cool as I kind of need it to be. And yeah, I'm just kind of blocked on this one thing. I mean, at least I have like pretty good visualization here, you know, where like I am actually seeing the result that I'm seeing, you know. I've just got like OpenGL lines drawing at the edges of all this collision stuff, and it's looking directly at the collision geometry that I'm feeding into Chipmunk. So yeah, like I've got the right tools in place, and I guess I just kind of need to like spend some time on this collision, and I don't know, maybe get help from some mega brains on it. So yeah, I think that's about all I've got, and thank you very much for watching. making a lot of progress here. Thank you, as always, to patrons. I added some more y'all to the patron list. If you want to be on this list, and you're a patron, then if you look at my Patreon posts, at my patron-only Patreon posts, then you can get a link to the spreadsheet where you can put your name down and get in this list. But thank you very much to all of these nice people for helping me continue to do this. I'm getting very close to being like really working on this game in earnest, and I'm very excited about that. I feel like I've kind of done most of the stuff that I've set out to do with Playscii and all that. And yeah, so thank you again for watching and supporting me, and I'll see you next time. Have a good day.